I didn't want to pull punches. I wanted to be very clear on, listen, there is a structure in place that doesn't benefit most people. And that's not American. That's not the American way. That's not why we're here as a country. Those aren't our ideals. Our ideals aren't let a small percentage make most of the money and have a thumb down on the rest.
Hey, welcome back to Connection Request. I'm Joel Lehman. This is the final episode of Season 2, but don't worry, we'll be back in the new year for Season 3. More on that in a minute. Today on the show, I'm talking to John Arms. He's a fractional CMO, co-founder of Voyageur University, and author of a new book called Revolt, The Rise of Fractional and the Death of Full-Time. Or, as some folks in the fractional community like to call him, the Mayor of Frackville. In today's conversation, we dive deep into the world and movement known as fractional. For those who aren't familiar with the term, a fractional executive refers to someone occupying a permanent leadership seat in a company in a fraction of the time thought necessary. In our conversation, John walks us through the basics of the fractional movement, how it differs from consulting, what kinds of professions it's for, characteristics of someone who is a good fit for fractional, and what it really looks like day to day to be a part of this world. We also talk about some of the megatrends that got us to this point, all the way back to 1970, Milton Friedman and shareholder economics, through to the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, and the rise of the fractional economy. I've got to say, the picture John paints of the future is a really exciting one. If you're interested in learning more about the world of fractional, I highly recommend you go grab a copy of his book, which you can find a link to in the show notes below. Thank you all so much for making this a fantastic Season 2. We love making the show for you and are so grateful to everyone for listening. And hey, if you want to help make the show even better for next season, would you take 5 minutes to fill out our listener survey? It would really help us and mean a lot as we plan for the future. The link to that is in the show notes also. Okay, we'll get to my conversation with John in just a minute after a quick word from our brilliant sponsor, SK Coffee. This season, we are thrilled to be sponsored by SK Coffee, a specialty coffee roaster based in Minnesota, shipping worldwide. Listeners of the show will remember Sam from Season 1, where he shared his journey from musician to entrepreneur. We'll hear more from Sam later in the episode. John Arms, welcome to Connection Request.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Joel. It's good to be here.
It's so good to have you. As I ask every guest on the show, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So who I am. So you've already said it. My name is John Arms. That's the name I was given. I am somewhat of, you know what they call me? They call me the Mayor of Frackville.
Great title.
So yeah, exactly. So I am a fractional professional, fractional chief marketing officer. And I am an educator of what fractional is and can do to people who want to do it and people who want to hire it. So, and that's kind of a big deal. So I'm also an author, teacher, advocate for small business. So all that mixed into one makes one John Arms.
What a great answer. Well, we are going to get into all of that and more. We're going to talk about your book today. I'm really excited to have you on to just unpack fractional, because I think it's a word that, at least for me, it's all over my LinkedIn feed, but I think not everybody understands it. So I'm excited to have you on to shed a little light. But first, this is a show about people's career journeys. So I want to go back in time a little bit to figure out how you got to where you are. Before you became the mayor of Frackville, you started your career, I believe, as a copywriter at Best Buy. Tell me a little bit about John Arms back then, what you were doing, what motivated you to do that, and what the early chapters of your career were like.
Yeah. It actually even goes before Best Buy. I was my first copywriting job. So for those who don't know what copywriting is, it's like you're coming up with the commercials and the ads and telling the story on behalf of your clients. And now we're going back in a time machine here, Joel, because that was quite a while ago, which I love. I'm very proud of all that time. But I was a writer at the Minnesota Daily at the University of Minnesota. And then I got into the ad department and I started writing ads there. And then I took my first job in 91 when I got to college. It was super hard to find a job. There just was not work. And so you were taking anything, and I saw an ad in the back of Adweek magazine that said copywriter needed in Great Falls, Montana. Couldn't have pointed it to on a map. So that was my first copywriting job. And then from there,
Okay.
I worked my way, as most people do, through creative departments, through most of for a big chunk of my career at in-house places like Best Buy, at agencies like Call McBoy and Big and Small, and but always doing the creative side of things and the writing side of things, and more of the outside of the box, not, the part of the economy needs people that think the way I do. And I think like others, like we just don't fit in normal buckets. We just see things through a different lens. And so that's where I found my career. Yeah. So found that and worked my way until I finally decided to start my own agency in 2004. And it's funny. Yeah. At that time, I thought, let's make a digital agency. And digital, what it was then 19 years ago, isn't what it is now. It was more of an inkling. And started that, ran that CEO, and drove it to as high as I could take it. And then in 2018, I decided, you know what? I've done that. It's independence from me from here, which has always been a thing for me and my family. But like from here, it's independence. And then I had to shape what that was. And that's what brought me to being a fractional pro, an educator.
So during that time of founding and running your own agency, what did you learn about yourself? What did you like about it? And what felt like you needed a little bit of movement towards something more independent?
A couple things I learned about myself was that there's a place in the world for people like me who have ADD. A never-ending stream of good or bad, right? But a never-ending stream of ideas and thoughts and creativity, and good or bad. Like not everything I did was great, but having a place for that mindset, like I was glad to see that there's a part of the economy that has a willingness and openness for that. So I learned that. I think a lot of times you look at the American economy and it seems very linear. Everybody's in their place. Things are very organized. The structure's kind of set. And there's sort of a pre-model for everything. What I learned is actually the best things in the economy run on a very adventurous entrepreneurial foundation. So that was the first thing I learned about the economy and myself, that I have a spot in that place. So that's one of the things I learned along the way. Many other things I learned.
So tell me a little bit about that journey in 2018. I'm going to guess we didn't have the word or the language fractional at the time, but what did kind of the early innings of your time in this journey look like in 2018?
It's such a fun question. Oh my God, I love talking about this. So the first few innings of fractional, it was called the gig economy. That's how we referred to it. And it was all mixed together. There was really, from a legislative side and a tax side and any other side you'd look at, there really wasn't much different between a freelancer. There wasn't fractional. So a gig economy, whatever, a contractor, a consultant, an Uber driver, like it was all one big mix of not W-2 people. It really was the wild west of that, right? Just anybody who's a weirdo that's not a W-2, you all go in that box. And then since 2018, we've sort of organized like, okay, they're different, right? They're different. So let's understand those differences and help ourselves understand them and create some education around that. For the longest time, fractional was thought to be a fancy word for consulting or freelance. And they're completely different. They're not the same at all. In fact, this is what we work so hard to educate on, but that's how people understood it. And so the early innings were about understanding what it is and the benefits it has to those who practice it and those who hire it, and how it differs, which means how to utilize it, what the value is, how to pay for it, the structure. So the early innings were crazy, man.
Well, in that case, I think let's dive into that education. I know you spend a lot of your time thinking about, writing about, talking about, and educating people on how to do this and how it works. So I would love to just kind of walk through the basics, if that's okay with you, a little bit of fractional 101. So just a few questions to ping you on, just kind of the basics to really help our audience get what we're talking about here. So first of all, how does what we're talking about, fractional, how does it differ from consulting or freelance?
Sure. And I'm going to start with the definition for you. So fractional,
I think that's a good place to start.
Yep. Is occupying a permanent leadership seat in a company in a fraction of the time thought necessary. And I'll break that apart for you. Okay. I'll start with, you're a leader, right? Fractional is a permanent leadership seat. So what does that mean? It means those critical leadership functions that everybody has to have, a CEO, CTO, marketing, sales, ops, proficiency in all these areas that every business needs, right? That's leadership. And fractionals are leaders in that space. You own the responsibility and accountability for that. You just happen to do it in a fraction of the time thought necessary, which is so interesting. So that's the definition of fractional. When I say permanent leadership seat, the kind of best way I can compare that is, let's talk about marketing. If you're running a business, you have to have it, right? It's permanent. It's always there. But it doesn't mean it needs all of your attention all the time, much like the reverse in your car. You have it, got to have it, but you're not using it the whole journey. And so it's permanent, but it's not full time. There's another way to think of it. So now how does that relate to consulting? Consulting is
or
not
freelance.
permanent. Right. Consulting and freelance, they're generally not, they might be a little bit longer term, but they're not permanent. Freelance, for example, is a company, hey, we need a new website. Okay, there's a beginning and a middle and an end and a contract and a scope and time, but it's not permanent. It's important, but it's not permanent. Same thing for consulting. We need to study a new dimension of a market. We need somebody to really understand that for us. We need to go harness that information. I need a consultant. So again, time bound. Those other things are also almost always defined by a scope and an hourly rate. Fractional, I wouldn't say exclusively, but more and more every day is defined by a retainer with a monthly rate. Just easier for everybody. Yeah. So those are a couple of differences between fractional, consulting, and freelance.
And so you, John, started this journey as you're a fractional CMO. That's one that I've seen a lot. What are the professions generally that we're seeing in the space of fractional right now?
So we're basically touching everything right now. It's where it's come to is, fun fact, we started Voyageur University as a company called Unified Funnel Metrics. How nerdy is that? It was literally fractional training for marketing people. And we had all these people coming in that weren't in marketing. They were in ops and IT and finance and taking the coursework. And like, what are you doing here? I was like, well, I want to go fractional too. I'm just not in marketing. I just want to do it as a general counsel or an ops person. We're like, oh my God. Well, that's, you got to listen to the market, right? That's what the wonderful Seth Godin has taught us. Like, always listen to the market. I'm like, okay, so we're going to open the tent. And this fractional, the drive for fractional is not limited to marketing. It just happened to be where it started. So that is, it is now touching it. It's really important to understand why that is. Why is fractional touching every area? It's not because it fits with certain roles or industries or disciplines. It has much more to do with the larger dynamics behind it, the social, cultural dynamics around the workforce today.
Yes.
Like 2021, we had the Great Resignation. 11 million people in the country said, the heck with this. I don't like the status quo of work. I'm out. After that, we had quiet quitting. We continue to, and nobody wants to go back to the office. So the reasons people are attracted to fractional, yes, there's a spot for everybody, but it doesn't have as much to do with the role and what technically it fits as it does to why people don't want to go back to the world we were living in, the Milton Friedman shareholder economic phase of the American experiment.
Yeah, we're going to get to all that and more. Your book, which we're going to talk about, I think really, you just paint such a nice kind of picture of how we got to here and the background, I think, of why people are going this way. Just maybe one or two more questions about just the basics and the 101. What are a few characteristics, John, especially when you have students come into your programming? What are the characteristics of someone who is a good fit for this versus someone who maybe, if they get through it, they learn about what it is and you're like, actually, no, you want a full-time job or you want to do something different. Tell me about who are the people best suited for this sort of work?
Sure. The people who are best suited are typically over 45 years old. And I want to unpack that a little bit. They're older. They've been around, which means they've amassed a level of wisdom and that which comes with it. Security, confidence, acumen. They have built all of that up. It's like this wonderful reserve of wisdom and everything that comes with it. Well, that kind of only comes with time, right? I mean, you just have to be in a space for a long time to understand the wins and the losses and the failures and the breaks to have that wisdom. Arthur Brooks writes this great book called From Strength to Strength. And it talks about when we're younger, we have fluid learning, and when we're older, we have crystallized learning or crystallized intelligence. And so those with crystallized intelligence fit really well.
Yeah.
So the next part of that comes to, so how do they find themselves there? Well, oftentimes what happens, or almost most of the time what happens, is people find themselves in a spot where all of that amassed wisdom and skill and acumen has tapped out in the place it was before. Either their division shut down and they're gone, they've been laid off, they don't want to work there anymore, corporate America doesn't feel right, they're tired of bureaucracies. There's all sorts of things that when you read about the Great Resignation, it's all line listed there, and I talk about it in the book too, is why do we exodus? It's because we have all that capability and promise and skill, and it doesn't have a place to go. Not a real good place anyway.
Yeah.
There's only enough, there's these structures in the American economy, like we put guardrails and limits around us that we shouldn't, like, oh yeah, you're wonderful and you're awesome, you have a lot to give, but stay in this little division of this company and, make a living and pay for your insurance, but not much more. That's not good and sustainable for America. It's better that everybody's really fulfilled and happy and productive and healthy. And the fractional world gives you that opportunity. Corporate America, not so much. Sad but true.
Well, and you have a quote in your book that I think for me really sort of crystallized what we're talking about. And business leaders, people who might be hiring this kind of role, they would prefer 50% of an A player versus 100% of a B player.
That's
talk
right.
a little bit more about that. Like what for the typical fractional executive in your world, in your community, what's kind of their world, their life look like? How many engagements do they have at a time? Yeah. What's that look like today?
Yeah. So it's wisdom work. And so wisdom work looks different than churn and grind work. And so the days obviously look a lot different. So when I say wisdom work, I mean guidance and direction and being an ally and using that wisdom to help move the company forward in the area that you're in. That's what this work is. So what that breaks down to is, generally wisdom work is not grind work. It's thinking and directing and communicating and talking. It's not, did you ever see the movie Office Space?
Yeah.
Oh, great movie. It's not TPS reports.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not just corporate churn of activity, right? It's pause and think and contemplate and clash and dialogue together and collaborate. That's wisdom work. And we need that. We want that. We love it. And people are actually really hungry to do that these days because they haven't had as much opportunity to do all that wisdom work. So the days tend to look like that. Funny thing, you can do that really well for 3 to 4 clients. And people wonder, like, how do I make time for 3 to 4 clients? Like, well, you remember when you had your corporate job? How many tasks did you have on your list every day? Oh, like 40. Okay, you can handle 3 or 4 clients just fine. Right? We don't normally think about it that way, but that fits, that works. It's not 8 hours per client. It's really not even time bound. Like you'll use your wisdom and solve a sales problem in a matter of minutes because you're using 30 years of experience. There's no hour that angers to. There's no churn. It's thinking work. So what I generally counsel people is for every client you have, plan 1 hour of time per client per day. It could be thinking time. It could be talking time. It could be leading people. Doesn't matter. 1 hour per day, 3 clients, 3 hours per day. Good. You've had an awesome day. Now, how come we're able to have that? Why is that even possible? Why do we think that a 3-hour day is good? Well, first, it's your highest value stuff, your wisdom, your ideas, your energy, your leadership guidance. But why is there space for that? Well, if you talk to most executives and ask them this question, how many hours a day do you spend in meetings? We poll our members. It's 8 hours a day, 6 to 8 hours. Okay, so why do you have space for 3 hours that's effective? Because you're not doing 6 to 8 hours of useless meetings.
One more question before we dive into the book. You have just come off of a couple weeks ago, what I believe the first fractional conference ever.
That's right.
You can correct the record. Tell me a little bit about that. You have some very kind of fresh data, I guess we can call it, of what that community is after, what they're feeling, what's working, what's not. How did it go? And I know you probably spent a good chunk of your time educating folks, but what did you learn about what the community is up to right now?
It was amazing. It really was. And a lot came out of it. And there was a lot of intention to what we do and what we did and accomplished. Frac 2023 are, of the few goals that we're like, okay, let's focus so we know what we're trying to solve and what we're trying to accomplish. And the first thing was We need to create a center of gravity for America in fractional. There needs to be a single place that we can go and be and exist and dialogue and educate and learn and advance. So the people who put it together were a lot of people from my Voyageur U communities, a lot of people who aren't in it, but just fractionals across the world, New Zealand, England, like this thing is global. And so a lot of people were involved in it. Like, let's do that. It needs a center of gravity. And so that was part one. There's some very big similarities between my mission and Voyageur and what Frack is up to, which is, I call it FOF, F-O-F, freedom, opportunity, and fulfillment. That's another goal with Frack and Voyageur, which is this exists to provide space for freedom for folks, opportunity and fulfillment. The other four is for all. Freedom, opportunity, and fulfillment for all. And so freedom, like, yes, you don't have to have 8 hours a day in useless meetings. You're not necessarily here for that. Opportunity, there's more opportunity for you than what comes with this one job, one paycheck. You just don't know it yet. And it can come in clients, it can come in projects, it can come in board roles, it can come in teaching, and open yourself up to that. And then fulfillment. When you work fractional, you work for every business that's not on the Fortune 500 list. Fortune 500 needs full-timers. Fortune 2000 needs full-timers for the most part. We'll get there, but they need full-timers now. But and so in doing so, you're serving, manufacturing company Y that's making $50 million a year, and X, which is a startup, and all of that. You're serving those 33 million businesses in the US. And it's very fulfilling work because you're going in and you're moving them forward by leaps and bounds and changing lives and helping communities. It's very fulfilling. So that's the third F. And then for all really matters, for us anyway. And so that's what we were sought to do with Frack. And for the most part, I think we accomplished it.
Yeah, well, I've heard good things coming out of it. I've had some friends who were there and saw some good stuff coming out of it. So excited to hear more as we go, and maybe there'll be a Frack 2024. And hopefully
we
get
just
back on.
had the committee meeting on that.
Okay. All right. Well,
Frack New Zealand, Frack England, Frack 2024. It's all in the mix.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so let's talk about the book. You have a new book out, just came out a few weeks ago. It's called Revolt, The Rise of Fractional and the Death of Full-Time.
Yeah.
It's great. I read it. It's, like I said, it's a really helpful read and definitely providing a guide for this conversation today. And you don't pull punches, John. You say that work is killing us.
Yeah.
And in the title, you pronounce that, the death of the full-time role. As you mentioned a little bit, there's this kind of through line between the Great Resignation and quiet quitting and the rise of fractional. Tell us a little bit more, just like give us the overview of the book, I guess, as we've been talking about it, and why you felt like you had to write it.
I felt like I had to write it because I think it needed to be said. And why pull punches in the first place? Like sometimes you just have to call balls and strikes as you see them. Yeah. Through my own lens, I'm biased. I'm one guy. I'm just a Gen X dude, right? Like, okay, I'm just one person. I'm no better or worse than anybody else. What I saw through my fractional journey and helping and training others was what I learned was there is a great opportunity. There's a great disservice and a great opportunity in front of the American worker right now. And I thought I need to get out there and illustrate what's going on and help people understand the amazing screwing we've been subjective to for many decades, why that exists. But yet on the other side, the amazing opportunity that exists if we can just not acquiesce to the status quo of full-time.
Yeah.
I didn't want to pull punches. I wanted to be very clear on, listen, there is a structure in place that doesn't benefit most people. And that's not American. That's not the American way. That's not why we're here as a country. Those aren't our ideals. Our ideals aren't let a small percentage make most of the money and have a thumb down on the rest. That's not what we believe in this country. It's not it's not even democracy. And I felt that was under threat because our current status quo. And I call it the full-time status quo. And I don't put the full-time on the worker. It's the idea that you saw some of the data in the book. We were doing great from 1950 to 1970. companies growing, wages are growing, everything's going up together. John F. Kennedy, rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Then in the mid-70s, we said, nope, it's about shareholders.
Yeah.
That created a culture and a movement and a drive that said shareholders win among before all, and that changed everything, right? So all of a sudden, the growth of prosperity decoupled, and the workers' growth just flattened for the most part. It grew, but not nearly at the rate of what was being produced in the economy.
Yeah.
So that structure that we created as a society and maintained as a society, first of all, I don't think it's sustainable. Work is extremely unhealthy. Now, if you love your work and you're passionate about your work, I work like crazy. I work crazy hours because I love it. I love it. I love what I do. I'm independent. But it's not about hours worked, right? It's about the way you work and what you're working for. And so I had to write the book and expose, like, there's a break here. And by the way, I'm not the only one exposing this. Look up John Stewart on the American economy. Look up the wonderful Professor Scott Galloway out of NYU Stern. Like, look at Simon Sinek. Like, there's talk about this same dynamic. Mr. Wonderful, what's his name from Shark Tank? I can't remember his name. Like
Kevin O'Leary.
Kevin O'Leary. He's like, a paycheck is what they give you to give up on your dreams. So I heard all that, and I'm like, well, I got to jump in and add to that voice.
Yeah.
So along with them, I decided I'm not pulling any punches on what I see either.
I think you really do paint a compelling narrative and picture. And actually, just to zoom in on something you said, you talked about the 1970s, and there's this character in your book who is present throughout, and his name is Milton Friedman. For those who don't know who Milton Friedman is, you sort of point a lot of things to him of how we got to where we are now. For anyone who doesn't know who he is or what he has to do with this conversation, can you tell us a little bit more about him and why he's such a central character?
Sure. So brilliant mind. I think if you read the book, you kind of consider him a little bit of a foe, and rightly so. Friedman and Friedman economics, part of what that gave us was this shareholder economy. And that's the corporation, the company's greatest responsibility is to deliver money back to its shareholders.
Yeah.
That's the core. And in
profit above all else.
Profit above all else, right? Profit above all else. And so in doing so, that set forth social, cultural, and economic norms that we lived to until recently. And when you believe in profit above all else, we're seeing the worst of that now. So in 76, it wasn't that bad. But as it grew and became what it was, it got terrible. I'll give you an example. Insulin. Profit above all else says $600 for a vial of insulin. It cost us 16 cents to make. Because that profit to our shareholders is more important than the people who take it or the workers who help us make it. And there's bullshit that says, hey, wait a minute. No, we got to charge that. Because all of this research we do and all that, I'm like, we see you. We can use Google. You're getting government funding for that. So, but this norm, right? This norm of profit before all else really damaged us as a society and continues to the point where people die.
Yeah.
And you think about that, go, no, not on my watch. That's not what we're here for. The people of the world, the people of America deserve better than that. And I don't mean to be political because I'm not, but I it's important that I voice that out. Like that created, the butterfly effect of where we are today. And it's not a knock on capitalism. It's a knock on profit before all else. Capitalism does not say profit before all else. That's a mistake people make. It's not the tenets of capitalism. So Friedman started it, and now he has to live with it.
It's an important differentiator. And I think it might be in the opening of the book even, but you say the number one cause of death is heart disease. Yep. The number one cause of heart disease is stress. And the number one cause of stress is work. I think without kind of that very sort of simple dynamics, maybe someone listening would go, why is this guy talking about people dying? But when you spell it out like that, it seems pretty simple. And so I just wanted
to... It really is. It's there's this weird thing that happens when we normalize things. Right? Like that, everything, you just use my research in the book, use your own research, you're going to come to the same conclusion. Heart disease is terrible. The cause of it is stress. The cause of stress is work. Like these are just facts that we see. But yet we've normalized that. It's okay. As long as the economy does good, we accept that. Or we do worse and say that's not really the problem.
Yeah.
Right? And so, but it is true. And it's been normalized. And you stop and go, well, wait a minute. That's not the point. I'm not here to live to 62 and then have a heart attack and keel over. That's not the point. My kids, my relationships don't need that out of me, my community. So there has to be a different path here. And that's what fractional is, a different path. So I do take some sinister looks at it, but not for theatrics, to say what we have normalized and what we do normalized can still be extremely damaging as it is. Listen, I mean, we've normalized everybody can have an AR-15 in this country if they want, to our own detriment, to people dying. And for some reason, we can't move anything off of that, which is just, we normalize things that we shouldn't normalize. We normalize work and sickness, and we can't do that.
There's a lot to love about SK Coffee, our presenting sponsor for Connection Request. Every time I talk to SK's founder, Sam Chelberg, I'm fascinated to learn more about what makes their coffee so special and why people are so drawn to them. Here's Sam.
We're not a company that you're going to get the exact same thing over and over again. It's always going to be an exploration. This is literally an agricultural product, and every year it's different. So it's like wine in that way.
But something even more special than the coffee itself has always stood out to me. It's the entire SK team's passion. They treat their work like a real art form, and each of them care deeply about coffee's people, place, and process. Here's Sam again.
The way we're trying to tell that story is not through, interesting crafted cocktail coffee drinks, right? It's all, what is the coffee trying to say? What is the producer, the place, the plant itself trying to say, the process? And we are literally translating that communication from the raw product into your cup.
To learn more about SK Coffee, visit skcoffeeplease.com or check out their excellent Instagram page. If you live in Minnesota, stop into one of their cafes in St. Paul or Minneapolis. You might even spot me there. All those links are in the show notes. Okay, now back to the show. Just to stick on the shareholder capitalism thing for a minute, a few years ago, the Business Roundtable, a group representing some of the biggest companies in the world, they came out and they kind of said, hey, we also care about our community and our employees, and we still really care about profits, but we're also going to think about sort of the holistic stakeholder ecosystem. A few years on from that, in your assessment, especially as you've written this book, did they mean that? Did anything really change by that?
It did in small business, but I don't know if they needed a roundtable to come up with that. Small business behaves in a way that is super healthy for America, amazingly healthy. And let me be clear on who I mean. Most of the business is off the Fortune 2000 list. The way they have to survive, the way they have to grow, they have to be very attentive to the things that the larger section gives platitudes to.
Yeah.
Like, you can't have a small business that's doing 10 million that wants to get to 20 without taking great care of your employees and being a good steward in your community, because everything is local. Like, it just doesn't work. So the nature of fractional, the nature of the kind of care you have to put towards everything is different in small business America. So that's the model. Quite honestly, that's where the next wave of 50 years of prosperity is going to come from there. But the words that were said and the commitment, does it match the actions? Well, I'll tell you, we have so many people coming to fractional telling us the opposite. Work is still toxic. I'm still underpaid. There's still sexism, racism, and ableism there. Like, those things that said we got to care for our people, those social markers, I don't see any evidence that they move.
Yeah.
To
Me
their
too.
own detriment, because the businesses that do get it, the businesses that say and act like, wow, yeah, our people really matter, and they act on it and they believe it and they lead from behind and underneath, they're killing it. And their people are happy. Costco, right? Like, those who live those words are doing really well. So it is a recipe for success, but it is outside of most people's comfort zone.
Yeah. John, one thing that is throughout the book, and you talked about a little bit, is fractional seems like a way to kind of combat ageism in the workforce a little bit. At least that's how it reads and feels to me. And as far as I can tell anyway, there used to be this thing for a lot of companies where if you went and you put in your time and you were a good employee, they took care of you and you had a job there for a long time. And maybe you would work at one, maybe two companies, a handful of companies, maybe one until you retired.
Yeah.
And that, in my experience in the workforce, is not the case anymore.
Not the case.
And I think you talk a lot about ageism. So can you draw that out a little bit for me? I think that's a really important part of this conversation.
It is. And this is where I get really positive, because I am actually a very positive, optimistic guy.
Yeah.
Think about it this way. You're going along in your career, and every day you're in it and every moment you spend in there, you're learning, right? That's just the nature of things. If your eyes are open and your ears are open, and you're learning. And what you're doing is you're collecting power, you're collecting wisdom, and you're sticking it in your backpack. So by the time you're in your 50s or 60s, your backpack is full of wisdom, chock full, right? Awesome, right? So now with Fractional, we have a way for you to pull that out and deliver it back to the marketplace. Like, that just makes perfect sense and logic. And that's exactly what's happening. Small businesses are like, I need some of that wisdom. Can you pull it out of your backpack for me? I see you have a full backpack. And so that's what's happening. So that's how it works. Why didn't we recognize, or why don't we act on that? The status quo structure, like this in the title of my book, status quo, full-time status quo, the status quo structure has not adopted for that. So if we think about like the corporate growth model in America, a ladder, very thin, a few places. If there's a person on their way to the top, there's 50 or 60 or 100 below. Still collecting the same amount of wisdom, but that structure does not have room there for them to take that and put it. So it has to go somewhere else in the economy for our economy to do well. And Fractional allows for that. So that's one reason. The other kind of comes from the industrial area. When we were building cars and airplanes and doing things on a production line, of people were seen of as standard units. Like, you're 6 hours drilling this bolt, you're basically a machine, right? And that caused us to relate time to value. And when we decided time equals value, we started acting in certain ways. Like, okay, your value is time, so I'm going to track your time, and I'm going to look at your time, and that is what carried us forward long before its utility. Because human beings, our value isn't in time. Our value is in our creativity and our genius and our relationship ability. We're not standard production units.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of layover from that, which is eroding, right? But it's a little bit of a layover from the industrial era thinking. And then this place in between where we're moving into the age of wisdom work, a little bit of a renaissance. I love it, right? And we're going to really benefit as a society as the more we move in that direction.
And, speaking of things we don't like ageism, you in the book, I think, talk about Fractional also being an antidote to some really ugly trends in corporate America, some of which we've talked about. I'm going to quote a section of the book. It's not office politics. It's not ladder climbing. It's not toxicity. It's not long commutes. It's not disrespect. It's not useless meetings. It's not sexist, racist, homophobic, ableist, or ageist. First of all, that sounds great. I want to go there. That sounds good. It almost sounds too good to be true. So keep me honest, but I know you're an optimistic guy. But if things are headed indeed in this direction that you sort of say it is, can you paint us a picture of how does this affect sort of workforce and corporations over the next, I don't know, let's say 10 to 15 years out if we play this out?
Oh my gosh. So just at the surface level, if we find a mechanism in a way where we can take all the wisdom and skills and beauty and talent of people, regardless of age, race, sex, all of that, right? And go, we see you for your gifts. And if we create a structure where we can see that and remove elements that keep us from accessing that for stupid reasons, right? Those structures were in place for the last 50 years, last 100 years, right? And Fractional has an ability to change that dynamic. Certainly at Voyageur and with Frack, we're out to do that. So the math, women still make 77 cents on the dollar as their male counterparts on average.
Yeah.
Non-white people, 66 cents. People with, paraplegic or some ableism issue, less, right? Now, is that a reflection of their gifts and ability? Absolutely not.
Hmm.
Experience? Absolutely not. In fact, you would argue that those who had more challenges in the status quo probably have more useful experience than those who didn't, because it was a harder road, right?
Yeah.
So my hope with Fractional is, and it does happen, is to find a way to get us to focus on the person and the skill and the gifts and not worry and think about the rest. Now, here's where I see that coming home. Let's say that you are a wonderful person and you're driving down the road and you're really good at what you do and you're 48 years old and you get in a car accident and you're paraplegic. It happens every day in America, often enough, right? Now, does that mean you can no longer work? Does that mean the gifts that you have are gone? No, it just means your body isn't able to deliver on that. So now we have Fractional, right? It's like, okay, what are the things that, if that happens to you, what are the things that are going to be an obstacle for you returning to work? It's not the commute anymore, because you can do it from home.
Yeah.
Right. So all of a sudden we have this ability to continue to access those gifts and those skills from everybody, regardless of the things that used to, social mores and these terrible things that held us back from accessing those. That is so great for America. It's unbelievable. And we just have to get there. My hope is Fractional plays a role in tapping into the gifts, which will undo those problems we've had with sexism, racism, ageism, and ableism. It'll undo those because of its focus in the right place. So it's not necessarily going to do it because we're going to attack it. We're going to work around it.
Sign me up. That sounds good. John, we've been talking a lot, rightly so, about the US, which is where we both live, but we have listeners to this show in the UK, in South Africa, Spain. Shout out to Carla, listener number 1. What are you seeing based on your research and your community on kind of the global movement? You mentioned a couple of countries.
Yeah.
Is the US leading on this? What, as much as you can tell, what does kind of that global landscape look like for Fractional?
The global landscape it's very similar wherever you are on the globe for the most part. So for example, we just concluded Frack 2023, literally during Frack. We had requests to do it in New Zealand, London, Spain. So other countries are like, that were here or heard about, like, we need that here. Yeah. Whatever that was, whatever that moment we created for Fractional was, they said, we need some of that here. Now, I can only surmise, I'm not in Spain, I'm not in London, I'm not in Auckland, but I can only surmise the reasons it is doing well here and growing here exist over there.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Have not seen it out of China or India yet. I don't know why. Maybe, who knows why, but I suspect we will. But it is a global thing.
Cool. John, as you said, Fractional is primarily for people 45 and up. That's sort of the target audience we're talking about. What about, for those earlier in their career, let's just talk about under 45 for a minute. Yeah. The world of work and the landscape and a lot of the trends that you described, it is shifting for us, those people as well. And maybe those people might not be ready for Fractional yet, or it doesn't make sense. Obviously, they haven't put in the hours and gotten the wisdom yet. What would you say, though, to those people based on what you're seeing as they think about, how do you plan for a career of decades that is sort of taking advantage of all these shifts? What would be some wisdom for us young folk?
Yeah, for the young folk. Well, it sounds weird, but in its first phase coming to our shores and growing, it absolutely, if you've amassed wisdom, you're of a certain stage, and you have that value to offer. So it makes sense if you're over 45 years old. There's just logic there, right? Yeah. Many people in those say, I've suffered long enough. It's time to get paid, right? There's the Gen Xers and the boomers often say that. What I would say to people in the generations behind, the millennials and all that, is learn it, embrace it. This is going to be your life. In fact, this is the life you want for yourself. You've already said so. So when we poll people that are millennials and young millennials or old, when we poll the next generations down and ask the same questions that would have been answered a different way years ago, do you see yourself working for the same company for 40 years and getting retirement? Absolutely not. I don't want that. I'm not even interested in that. Yeah. I literally would not. I behave and pursue in such a way where I don't have to do that. Now, why? Because they saw what it did to their parents and it didn't really look that great to them. And let's dispense with the myth right now that millennials are lazy. There's this narrative that comes out of boomers for the most part, because they don't look like them, they're lazy. They're the hardest working people and the most enlightened people they are. They're just not stupid.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, I have a lot of gifts. Now, you may not have 30 years of wisdom, but to work across a couple different disciplines in a couple of different ways over time, you're gaining wisdom as you go. And knowing you're not going to go to a place where you want one job and one salary, when you want those limitations, well, then you kind of have to start thinking through a fractional lens, because that's the model that's taking place in America right now. If it's not one job, one salary, permanent full-time, then what else can it be? Consulting, freelance, fractional, or just getting out, right? Being a entrepreneur and starting up on your own. So the generations behind us, and I'm saying, when I say us, I mean Gen Xers like me, the generations behind us, it behooves them to embrace this. It's not hard, right? They get it. They understand it. They're very smart. They're a very educated population. You are like, yeah, well, I'm not going to work 60, 70 hours a week and not see my kids for a paycheck that can leave. And because I have to have health insurance and I'm going to stay there, even though I hate the job and it's killing me, like those status quo things, it ain't happening in the following generations. It's not even really a thought. So you're well on your way already, I should say, just by your values. Just by your values. We have a lot to learn from the younger generation.
Well, and speaking for my generation, likewise, right? We all have something to learn from each other. Part of the genesis of the show, honestly, is everybody has something to teach each other about career journeys.
Right.
John, one thing that I really appreciate about not only your book, but just I'm coming to figure out you as a human, is you talk a lot about giving. And you talk about giving as the greatest tool for business development. And honestly, I think it's just sort of an attitude, a mindset for those of us who can. It's one that really resonates with me. And I'll say my business partner and I have already been talking about this for us as we explore the world of business development. And it's something that resonates. So could you tell me a little bit about how and when did you learn that? And tell me a little bit about why to you that's an important part of this.
Yeah. Giving and other things I'll mention sort of in the same context. I just looked at what are the structures, what are the things that work in fractional, and looking through the objective lens, like what are the bits and pieces that make it work for everybody? And I studied that and I thought, what does it look like? And it does not, again, look like the former status quo, which is essentially extraction economics.
Yeah.
So what does it look like? And I came across, I had a chance to meet Bob Berg, who wrote The Go-Giver. Great book and great person. And I learned a lot in reading that book. And what I learned was probably something that we all learned as children and somehow forgot along the way. Do unto others, right? As you want done unto yourself. And I don't say that for religious reasons. That's just what my mom said, right?
Yeah.
But a giving mindset. In the fractional world, it's really important that you put out good vibes, right? It really matters. That's one of the mechanics. And a giving mindset and also a vulnerable mindset, a grateful mindset, that by practicing those and being deliberate and intentional about those things, you are putting out such good vibes that the universe can only deliver back to you goodness that comes from that. If you're a jerk, you're putting out jerk vibes, and the fractional economy does not do well with jerk vibes. You're out, right? Now, jerk vibes worked great in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Thank you. Greed is good from Wall Street, right? Like jerk vibes did a thing and it caused our economy to crash in 2008 in a horrible way. Those aren't the vibes that work out here. And those aren't the vibes anybody wants anybody. I think we sort of aged out on the things that come from extraction economics. And I think we're moving into giving economics. There's a great book called Beloved Economies by Jess Remington. And it talks about that. Like, hey, it doesn't have to be about taking and extraction. And that applies to all aspects of being a fractional pro. When you network and connect, give. When you're, as Bob talks about in his podcast and other things, when you're serving a client, bring way more value than getting paid for. Giving mindset. It's powerful stuff. Yeah. And I think it has a lot to do with being fulfilled in this as well.
Yeah. Well, John Arms, I am grateful for you for giving so much of your time to us today and the good vibes that you've brought. The book is great. It's called Revolt, The Rise of Fractional and the Death of Full-Time. Beyond picking up the book, which is just a really great kind of guide to this world, Where else can listeners keep following you and what you're up to as this journey unfolds?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And so you can always find me and friend me and follow my content. I've got a blog, I've got a newsletter, we've got Voyageur U, which is where we train fractional. We have a LinkedIn online community, so I'm very active in there. Very active in the Fractionals United community, which is a totally different community, but a great one. So if there's a fractional place, I'm usually not far behind.
John, thank you so much for your time. I hope people check out the book. Congratulations to you on it and Frack.
Thank you.
John Arms, Mayor of Frackville, thanks for your time today.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Joel.
That is it for today's episode of Connection Request. If you enjoyed today's episode, would you make sure you're following us? It'd mean a lot. Today's show is produced by Marie Iannazzo and me, Joel Lehman. Our theme music is by the amazing Mike Lauer and his band Viewers Like You. It's from their album Panoramia. The show is a production of Shrug Content, a podcast studio based in Minnesota. You can learn more about us at shrugcontent.com. Special thanks to SK Coffee, our presenting sponsor. You can learn more about them at skcoffeeplease.com. If you live around the Twin Cities, ping me. I'll take you there myself. First cup is on me. You can connect with the show on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Send us feedback, guest ideas, and funny TikToks at connect@shrugcontent.com. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.